So welcome to Powerless Penguins United Big Book Study. This week I'm pleased to welcome back Max. Over to you.
Good morning, Laws. Thank you for your service. Great to see you. Great to see everybody. It's great to be back. I missed everybody last week. So yes, it's amazing to be back and fantastic to be in this part of the book. We're going into the fear inventory, and like Law says, I'll do a little bit of recap as to where we are. We are in step 4. At this stage, we have completed the resentment inventory. We've gone through that definite example that is set out on page 65. We've gone through all of the people, principles and institutions with who we're resentful with. We've asked ourselves why we were angry, not why God made us angry. We've talked about how those resentments have affected us around those 7 stimuli of self-esteem, pride, sex relations, personal relations, ambition, pocketbook, and security. And we're going to come back to those in a moment, because you'll notice that word fear that is bracketed on page 65 beside a few of those stimuli. So we're out of the resentment inventory. Okay, by the time you get to your fear inventory, and you do it in this order, by the way, in the order in which it's set out in the book. Why would you not? It just complicates matters. So you've completed your resentment inventory. You'll be quite relieved to get that one out of the way. Bearing in mind what we've covered over the last number of weeks. So I'm just going to get straight into fears. And as we go through this, it just keeps coming into my mind that think about those fears that you have whilst we're going through this. And like resentment, there is no order of severity in the resentments. If you've got a resentment, it's a resentment. There's no big resentments and medium resentments and little resentments. If you as an alcoholic addict have a resentment that affects you, end of. Don't be trying to work anything out other than that. The same thing applies to fears. It's not a little fear and a big fear or anything in between fear. If you've got a fear, it affects you. It impacts you. And the way that we deal with it, no matter what the fear is, the solution is still the same. Okay, so let's not have the little trickster of the ego that tells you, oh, don't be worried about that, you'll be fine. If it's coming up for you as a fear in this inventory, then something needs to happen with that. Okay? And I'll give you some of the examples that I went through as I was going through this inventory, and how this enabled me, as it says, the promise, to outgrow my fears. Because that's what happens. If we do this inventory in the way that it's set out and we're bringing it into our step 5, something happens where we begin to, at once, outgrow our fears. But we'll talk about the process of all of that as we go through this short period of time together. So call to mind those fears. I don't really care what they are. They're your fears to be dealt with. But just call them to mind, bring them in to your thoughts. And there's no denying the fact that we're impacted by them. Everybody in the world has fears. But for us, it's something very specific within our psyche, within our thinking, that impacts us differently, perhaps, to other people that don't have that allergy and don't have that mental obsession and so on. So bottom of page 67, the paragraph begins with, like Laws said, notice the word fear is bracketed alongside the difficulties with Mr. Brown, Mrs. Jones, the employer, and the wife. So if you turn back to page 65, you'll see that with Mr. Brown, the word self-esteem is bracketed. Fear is bracketed beside self-esteem. And also with Mrs. Jones and with the employer. But when you get to the wife, the fear is bracketed beside the word security. It doesn't matter where the word fear is bracketed. This is your fear when you're doing your inventory. So the first time I went through the steps, my sponsor just said to me, write down every single fear that you have. Just literally write it down. And we talked about it in the step 5. Then when I went back through the steps again, we did the same exercise where we wrote down all of my fears. But in this resentment inventory, he also asked me to put the word fear in brackets. So an easy way to explain this is, you always know that I use my sister as the example. I'd completed the third column for every single person, principle and institution. I'd completed all of those 7 stimuli. And once I'd written down all of the 7 stimuli, I went back to the top of my list and then went through it again and bracketed the word fear. So I had listed how I'd been affected by all of these people in the first instance, then went back to the top and bracketed the word fear beside the stimuli where this person, institution or principle affected me the most. Okay. So with my sister, when I was with my sister in the moment with her, I bracketed the word security, because when I was with my sister, my security in that moment with her was affected. I was riddled with fear because I felt anxiety in the moment when I was with her. Okay. So that's why I pinpointed with her, my fear related to my sister was absolutely about my security, my angst, my fear of being around her. Okay. When I moved on to my brother and I looked at those stimuli that I had against him, the word fear was bracketed around pride, what I thought he thought about me. Okay. When I moved on to the next person, my daddy, as I call him, the word fear was bracketed beside self-esteem, what I thought about myself. Okay, so you can see where when I was interacting with different people through my resentment inventory, how I was affected, my fears arose in different ways with different people, with different principles and with different institutions. What we're doing here in this fear inventory is a thorough review of our fears. My fear with somebody like Laws is very different to my fear around somebody like Angie. Now, it doesn't matter what that is, but my fear shows up in different ways. It depends how I am at any given point in time, and it depends how I react to you. But ultimately, when we get into this thorough inventory of ourselves, you start to establish the fact that fear is just fear. It doesn't matter who it is and when it crops up. What we need to do is to overcome it. And we cannot do that by ourselves. Okay? So that's why it's given the nod back to that third column in your resentment inventory. But those fears aren't necessarily related to the actual resentment that you have with that individual. Be clear that your resentment inventory is completed and you're moving into a fear inventory. Okay? So that explains why those little words are bracketed. If anybody has any queries or questions, email me, text me, do whatever you need to do, and I'll go through that in more detail. But essentially, You get the drift, I hope. But here's the really important thing for us. Fear, this short word, somehow absolutely touches about every aspect of our lives. So like I've said, it doesn't matter whether it's Angie, it doesn't matter whether it's laws, it doesn't whether it's when I was at school, it doesn't matter whether it was my job, my finances, my friendships, my travel arrangements, whether I'm getting fat or not. It touches every aspect of our lives. And the reality of it is, it goes on to tell us, it was an evil and corroding thread. Oh boy, is that so true. The fabric of our existence was shot through with it. If you think about that visualization, it's an evil and corroding thread. The fabric of our own existence was shot through with it. The example that I give to my sponsees at this point is, if you think about if you're wearing a really woolly jumper and you get a little thread on it and you pull the thread to try and get rid of the thread, and then you look down 5 minutes later, the thread has attached itself to another part of the jumper, and you pull the thread and you try to throw it away, and 5 minutes later it's attached to your right sleeve rather than your left sleeve. You can't get rid of that little bit of thread and it becomes really annoying. That's the same with fear. You know, it's an evil and corroding thread which touches every fabric of our existence. If I've got a fear about anything, it's not just the fear in that moment of what I'm thinking about. That fear then manifests itself and projects itself onto everything else. So if I've got a fear about my inadequacies at work, it will do something to me where I then project that onto everything else, where I'll feel inadequate around everybody at work, not just the person that I have the fear about. I'll start to create stories in my mind that, okay, my boss has a problem with me, so I get afraid about that. Well, if my boss has a problem with me, then that means the people that she's talking to have a problem about me too. Okay, so my thinking starts to go elsewhere. And the little thread of fear that starts with my boss then attaches itself to every single person in the place in which I work. So the evil and corroding thread of the thought process that I have about the fear about my boss touches every single part of my life in work, where I start to react and behave and do things in reaction to my fear about my boss. But in actual fact, I have those behaviours, reactions and whatever with everybody around me. Yet it only stems from that one thread of my thinking about my boss. It's incredible how evil and corroding one's fear can be. The other example that my sponsor's given me, and I never forget this, it is shot through the fabric of our existence. If you think about this visualization, when you go to a store to buy a white t-shirt, there might be a red t-shirt, the exact same t-shirt design, right, in red. And when the manufacturer is making those t-shirts, it's the same t-shirt, it all begins as white. But in order for it to become red, what the manufacturer does is literally shoots through a red dye until it changes colour. And that's exactly what happens with fear. I might have this fear in my mind and then boom, my entire life is shot through with it. That's how instantaneously my fears can take over me and have implications across my entire life when it has actually got nothing to do with anything other than what I'm thinking. Because the reality of it is, as I've gone through this inventory, a lot of my fears are irrational, completely and utterly irrational. Or they're completely and utterly self-centered, all about me. Because remember, on page 62, selfish self-centeredness, that is the root of our troubles. And that applies to fear, self-centered fear. All of my fears, not all of them, but the biggest majority of my fears of what's going to happen to me. What if this happens to me? What if that doesn't happen to me? What if she says that about me? What if she doesn't say that about me? So self-centered. It's incredible. And what I experienced through my inventory was I didn't realize how deeply rooted, how deeply impacted I was by my fears. I would never have been able to tell you the extent to which my fears impacted me until I did this inventory. And it shone a light on so much about me, which was incredible. So I love those little examples. The evil corroding thread, because it touches every single fabric of your existence, and your life is ultimately, boom, shot through with it. Because of something that you think. It's all about the thinking. It goes on to say, fear. Remember, this is what we're talking about. My fear, it set in motion trains of circumstances which brought us misfortune that we felt we didn't deserve. But did we not, ourselves, set the ball rolling? Think about that question. Think of those times where you were in fear and you made a decision to take an action or to do something that then set trains in motion, that created circumstances which then brought you more misfortune, which you then felt you didn't deserve. Even though of yourself, you made that decision and you set the ball rolling. But then you became the victim because of the decision that you made out of fear. You set the trains in motion, but you felt you didn't deserve what happened. Let's talk about that. Let's think about that. Because to be able to overcome that type of decision making based on self-centered fear, based on irrational fears, based on fears that actually, why do they even exist? It's delusional, really. But I wasn't able to see how delusional my thinking and my reactions were genuinely until I went through this amazing prayerful exercise to bring all of these fears to the fore, to help me understand what made me tick. So, for example, I'll use a work example. In my using, in my drinking, not even within that, but in general terms in my life at work, I was a very conscientious employee. You know, it tells us in the chapter to the employer at the back of the book that, you know, us alcoholics are really productive and conscientious people. You know, we're one of the greatest workers ever. That's why you want to keep us in employment. If you can help us with our addictions and so on, it's a really good thing. Because to lose a member of staff like us, you know, when we're recovered is a really detrimental thing to your business, because you probably not recruit somebody like us again that has the diligence, the commitment and the honesty and so on. But anyway, we'll cross that bridge when we get to the chapter to the employers. But really and truly in my career, I was ambitious, I was diligent, I was hardworking, all of that. All of the positive attributes that you would expect from an employee I was. a lot of the negative towards the end, I was. But in my drinking and using days, I would set trains in motion in work, because do you remember when, in the doctor's opinion, it talks about the alcoholic who can't fulfill the deadline, and that the alcohol use becomes more important than anything else. It says on page XXIX, I do not hold with those who believe that alcoholism is entirely a problem of mental control. I've had many men who had, for example, worked a period of months on some problem or business deal, which was to be settled on a certain date favourably to them. They took a drink a day or so prior to the date, and then the phenomenon of craving at once became paramount to all other interests, so that the important appointment was not met. These men were not just drinking to escape, they were drinking to overcome a craving beyond their control. So in my period of time when I was working and that doctor's opinion circumstance was happening to me, I was missing deadlines left, right, and centre, right? But in order for my reputation at work to continue to be maintained as a really conscientious, diligent employee, I would set trains in motion to cover up my inadequacy at work, which had resulted because of my drinking and using. So I exaggerate to make the point. I would go in and I would have a team of 10 people. I was about to miss the deadline. I would go into these 10 people and set trains in motion, get them all running about like whirling dervishes, crazy, causing chaos, for them to do a load of work, for me to be able to have all of the information to present to my boss, right? Ultimately, the 10 people weren't able to deliver what I needed to deliver. I then became raging at the team that they weren't able to deliver for me, and set trains in motion and having conversations with them. I didn't believe I deserved the circumstances that I was put in, because those 10 people let me down. But the only reason why that all happened was I was terrified of going to my boss and telling her the truth that I was going to miss the deadline. So rather than be honest and tell her the truth, I covered it up through my fear, got a load of other people involved. I had misfortune which I didn't feel I deserved. I then ended up with resentment. But realistically, did I not just set the ball rolling? What prevented me from saying, do you know what, Mrs. Boss? I ain't going to make this deadline. My pride, what I thought she thought of me. My self-esteem, what I thought of myself. My personal relationships, my security in that moment, my ambition, my pocketbook. All of that was affected by my fear because I couldn't be honest. I set the trains in motion, impacted everybody around me, yet I felt I didn't deserve the outcome of my situation of not being honest. Isn't that remarkable? Isn't that unbelievable? That the fabric, the thread of that evil, corroding thread of my fear about myself impacted on all the members of that team, yet I didn't think I deserved it. Yet all that was happening right in the line of sight was the fabric of my existence was shot through with fear. I just think that is the most amazing thing to be able to see, to be so awake to that. And that is just a work example, right? Because I find it easy to talk about that. But I did the same with my family. I did the same with my friends. Set trains in motion to cover up things or where I couldn't be honest with someone. Even though I thought that I was doing the right thing, even though my motives were good, like it says when we go into the resentment inventory. But the reality of it is all I was doing was causing more chaos and carnage because of fear. Ask yourself now, even in your recovered state, how is fear showing up in your life? How is it impacting your life right now? And when we get into, step 10, 11 and 12, our daily reprieve, we've got a whole, set of spiritual tools in our toolkit that enable us to overcome it on a daily basis. And thank God for that. But where are you sitting right now when you call to mind those fears? How much of this evil, corroding thread is alive and kicking in your life? How much of it is shot through with it? Because the solution is always the same. It goes on to say, sometimes we think fear ought to be classed with stealing. It seems to cause more trouble. You know, if I was in a situation, and this has happened, where I was short of a few bob, I was short of a few pounds, and I dipped my hand in the till where I worked, thinking that taking the money from the till would make my life better, when in actual fact stealing the money made things worse. That's what we're talking about here. Fear will make things worse. We're making decisions and projecting things out of our fear. We're making a decision irrationally, perhaps, out of fear to try to make things better. But like the stealing, when we get caught, isn't it worse? That's the reality of where we live when we're trapped in this fear. Fear can be a significant part of my life if I don't follow the instructions that are provided to me through this spiritual way of living. Fear can override everything, but by the grace of God, we're presented with something completely different as we live this way and practice these spiritual principles. But in the first instance, you've got to do this. We reviewed our fears thoroughly. Thorough and moral inventory of ourselves. Remember, we're still in this prayerful exercise in step 4. Okay? We completed this thorough and fearless moral inventory of ourselves. So what have we got to do? We've got to put them down on paper. Like I've said at the beginning of our resentments, I ain't going to talk to you about worksheets. I ain't going to give you a list of fears that you tick off and say, oh yeah, they're all mine. No, that's not what Alcoholics Anonymous is. The big book of Alcoholics Anonymous is asking you from yourself in this prayerful exercise to review your fears thoroughly, not from a shopping list that somebody else provides to you. Because if somebody provides you with a shopping list, you'll take this, oh yeah, that's me. Yeah, never thought about that one. That'll be me. That'll be me. You're calling to mind your own fears in a prayerful exercise with the power greater than yourself. We put them on paper. Even though we have no resentment in connection with them, they're making the point here, like I said earlier, we've completed the resentment inventory. Leave that to one side. We're only dealing with your fears now. Your fears. Not the people, the institutions, or the principles that are on there. You've already done the little exercise where you're bracketing the word fear about how you're affected within those 7 stimuli, okay? But this is not anything in relation to your resentments. The next little instruction. We asked ourselves why we had them. This is gold. This is a precious gem. And if you've done your fear inventory and you haven't asked yourself this question about every single one of your fears, I don't know what you've been doing in your fear inventory. Because the only way you're going to get to the bottom of this thorough exercise with your fear is asking yourself why you had them. So, a really silly example I'm going to use, because it was a real fear for me, right? It's totally silly. But when I went into this inventory a few years ago, I was terrified of black cats. Like, I mean, terrified of black cats. So I had to put it down on my list, right? I wrote it down. There was no resentment in connection to it. The next instruction, I had to ask myself why I had them. So my sponsor would say, I wrote it all down, and then in my 5th step, this is what we talk about. But as I'm sitting writing my inventory, I'm terrified of black cats to the extent that I would scream like a banshee and run to the other side of town if I saw a black cat. Totally and utterly irrational. But in the first instance, I sat, I'm afraid of black cats. Why? Well, because my mother didn't like black cats. Okay, but why are you afraid of black cats? Well, because my mother's afraid of them. Yeah, but what's that got to do with your fear? Well, she didn't like them. Yeah, but why are you afraid of black cats? Well, I just don't like them because my mother didn't like them. But why do you not like black cats? Well, because my mother told me they were evil. But why are you afraid of the black cats? Because they're evil. But why do you think they're evil? Because that's what my mother told me. But why are you afraid of the black cat? And you keep going, why, and why, and why, and why, and why, and why. And ultimately, I was going round in circles. I was afraid of black cats because my mother told me they were evil when I was a child, and she didn't like them because of something that she had gone through in her life. Therefore, when I grew up with that learned behaviour, I was afraid of black cats too, right? So in digging down the why, and I was going round in circles and coming back to the point that I'm afraid of black cats because of what my mother taught me, right? The next question, wasn't it because self-reliance has failed us? Got to ask myself that question. My self-reliance had failed me. I couldn't overcome my fears by myself. I was going circular in that conversation. I was going circular around that fear, ultimately coming back to the fact that I can't overcome my fears of myself. Self-reliance was good as far as it went. It goes on to say that, but it didn't go far enough. So my fear in my self-reliance took me to a certain extent, right? Where if I saw a black cat, I would scream and run in the other direction. That was my self-reliance. That got me so far, but it wasn't good enough. Because how am I going to spend the rest of my life running away from black cats? It's so stupid, but the same thing can be applied to any fear. Am I going to continue the rest of my life not being able to go to my friend's house because she has a black cat? Like, self-reliance has failed me there. I'm not going to pop round to your house if you've got a black cat because I'm terrified. Like, what way is that to live? Self-reliance got me to a certain point, but it wasn't good enough. Now, that is a really silly example, but it's a live one that was in my life, and I'll come on to talk about it when we get to another couple of paragraphs. But if you think about the fear that you have, most likely it's coming from your thoughts. Most likely it's coming from a past experience that doesn't exist in this moment, and you're trying to sort it out for yourself, but you can't. Another example would be, I used to be afraid of flying. Why? Well, because I don't know what's going to happen when I'm in the air. But why would you need to know what's going to happen in the air when the pilot's there? Why are you afraid of flying? Well, what happens if the pilot doesn't know what he's doing? But why would you be afraid of flying? Because the pilot's qualified. Well, I think I'm going to die. Why do you think you're going to die? Well, what if the plane falls out of the air? But why would the plane fall out of the air when the pilot knows what they're doing? Why? Sitting on a flight, panicking, terrified, because my thinking was telling me the plane was going to fall out of the sky. Irrational. And I know plane crashes do happen, but they don't happen that often, you know? But in my mind, I wouldn't go on holiday because I was terrified of flying. What way is that to live? It's no way to live. And that's certainly not the way that this power greater than me wants to live. That's not freedom from the bondage of self. We've asked God in our third step prayer, we've made the decision, right, to hand our will and our life over to the care of God as we understood him. So if I get on a plane and the plane falls out of the sky and I die, well, that's the way it's supposed to be. And I'm not going to know anyway. What difference does it make? I'm giving these silly examples, but the reality, and they're not really silly because they were alive and kicking in my life. They prevented me from going to see my friends because they had a black cat. They prevented me from going on holidays because I was afraid the plane was going to come down. Janie Mac, it's the no way to live. You'll all be able to think of those serious fears of, I'm going to lose my job. I'm not going to be able to pay my rent. Well, why do you think you're going to lose your job? Why are you afraid of losing your job? Well, I'm not going to have any money. How do you know you're not going to have any money? Because you haven't lost your job. But what if I do? But why would you? All of this circular thinking, the why. The reality of it is, wasn't it because your self-reliance has failed you? That's the reality of what it's bringing us to here. It goes on to say that some of us once had great self-confidence, but it didn't fully solve the fear problem or any other. When it made us cocky, it was worse. So that work example that I had, when I was filled with fear, I'd get really cocky, real bravado, and cover everything up. Okay? So I'll give this example. I come into work, I do a presentation. One of my colleagues, in my opinion, takes me down in front of my other colleagues because points out a couple of things in the presentation that are incorrect and not right. Terrified after that presentation. I go out into the corridor, get my 10 people together and say, we're going to rectify all of this, blah, 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 blah. Go in and do the presentation again, and I will not let that person that embarrassed me the first time we did that presentation have anything that's going to take me down again. And I would go back into that presentation terrified, filled with fear, but stealth-like. And I would take that person out at the knees and they wouldn't even see me coming. Terrified, cocky, bravado. Don't you dare do this to me. Do you know who you're dealing with? But as nice as ninepence at the same time. This person would never have known that this was about them. Dying inside with fear. But the cockiness and the bravado, you would not have known that I was impacted in any way, shape or form. That's how much fear had me in its grip. You all know examples like that, where we get cocky, and then we walk away. And when I walked away from those scenarios, most likely in work, it was over to the bar to have another whatever, to be able to get over the shame, the guilt, and the remorse as to what I'd done to those people in that room. Self-reliance had failed me. But here's the beauty of this way of living. Here's the beauty of this program of action. With all of the fears that you're sitting with, listening to this morning, or whenever you're listening to it, you may be dressed to the nines, going somewhere really, really important, looking $1 million, yet inside you are terrified. Here's the golden ticket. Perhaps there is a better way. We think so. I think so. Through my bitter experience, having gone through all of this fearlessly, thoroughly, we think so. And the people that wrote this book know so. Hence the reason why they took the time to write it down. Because get this, at this point, in this prayerful exercise, here's where we are at. For we are now, right this moment, now, not in the future, not in the past, for we are now on a different basis. We've made a decision to turn our will and our life over to the care of God as we understood him. So we are now on a different basis. The basis of trusting and relying upon God. Like, think about that. Bring that in to where you're at right now. If you have truly made the decision to hand your will and your life over to the care of God as you understood him, you're on a different basis right now at this point. You've gone through all of your inventory. You've gone through all of those fears. You've seen that your self-reliance is failing you. There is a better way. May you find him now, is what it says on page 59. In those moments of fear, may you find him now. May you find him now. May you find him now. In those moments of fear, you're not connected to God reliance. In those moments of fear, you're connected to your self-reliance. In those moments of fear, you're not connected to love. You're connected to fear. Fear is the opposite of love. Love is God. Fear is self-reliance. Think about all of that stuff. Fear is the future. Resentment is the past. In this moment, may you find him now. We are on the basis of trusting and relying upon God now. We trust infinite God rather than our finite, tiny, minuscule selves. Infinite, he who has all power. Top of page 59. He who has all power. Not if, not but, not maybe. We are in the world to play the role he assigns. I'm not in the world to play the role that I think I need to be for my boss, my colleagues, my friends. I'm in the world to play the role that he assigns me. Remember those third step promises on page 63. We have a new employer. We agnostics, we are spearheads of God's ever advancing creation. As long as we stay close to him and do his work well. The third step promises again, my little plans and designs no longer matter. The thread of beautiful freedom from the bondage of ourselves, rather than the evil corroding thread that we're shot through with fear, is running right the way through from your third step, right the way through, whilst you're turning your will and your life over to the care of God, right to the point where you say that amen at that seventh step prayer. This is a prayerful exercise the whole way through. Never forget it. Because here's the thing, just to the extent that we do as we think he would have us and humbly rely on him, does he enable us to match calamity with serenity? The calamity of the black cat. Oh my God. Ridiculous now when I think about it. Ridiculous, right? I've begun to outgrow my fear. I'm now the cat woman in my neighbourhood. There's cats all over the place in my yard. I don't have one in my home because I don't have the facility to be able to do that. But I'm the cat woman. My fear of cats is gone. My fear of flying, it's been taken away. Honest to goodness, like the drink thing, like the drug thing, my fears have been removed. And I now have this beautiful way of living that when I'm in the moment of fear, I have a set of spiritual tools that have been given to me that enables me to always overcome, to detach from the self-reliance and connect with this power, this infinite power. That's the gift that's given to us as we move through this inventory and out the other side of it. And it goes on to say, and this is so incredibly important, we never apologize to anyone for depending on our Creator. Notice that word for God. creator. I have been created. Page 25, our creator has entered into my heart in a way that is miraculous. I can tell you now, the first 100 that wrote this book, that is my personal experience, having gone through this process. My creator has entered into my heart and only provides love, never provides fear. Gives me reliance upon that power, not on myself. This is the power of this way of living. We can laugh at those who think spirituality the way of weakness. Paradoxically, it is the way of strength. Like it says in We Agnostics, we are possessed by this new power, this new love, superhuman strength, direction. It's the way of strength. And it does tell us that the verdict of ages is that faith means courage. We've got the courage of a lion. When I have faith in this process, that's all I have at this time. I don't even have to have faith in anything else at this time. If I have faith in this process, keep showing up, keep turning the pages, let the book do the work. I take the action, follow the instructions of my sponsor, follow the instructions of these inventories. I am given such strength, direction to be able to overcome any fear that I'm presented at any given moment of the day. And that is really and truly my experience. If I stay close to him and do his work well. If I don't, it won't work. But if I do, it will. Because here's where I live. All men of faith have courage. That's where I live. And where I also live is they trust their God. I trust God. This takes practice. Infinite God, rather than my tiny, finite, minuscule little self. I never apologize for God. No need to. Many people don't realize I'm relying on God. Many people think that we're just confident, comfortable people. They don't understand that there's something else working in and through us. So instead of the cockiness, the bravado, the stealth-like, arrogant mags, what this power enables me to do instead is that we let this power demonstrate through us what he can do. So at this point, we have a prayer. We ask him to remove our fear. We ask him to direct our attention to what he would have us be. Give me the direction. Where do you need me to be? What do you need me to do? What do you need me to bring to this situation? Take away the fear. Give me your love. Tell me what you need me to do. I am here to play the role that he assigns. And as a result of asking for those fears to be removed and direct the attention to what God would have me be at once, and I mean at once, we commence to outgrow fear. And again, later on in our daily reprieve, we're given more spiritual tools to be able to do this in any given moment of the day. But right now, we are trusting. We are on a different basis in this moment. We're asking God, boom, things start to change. But it takes the practice. I cannot emphasize that enough. So I've started to outgrow my fear. You remember that on page 62, we talk about, the root of our troubles. And we talked about those leaves and, picking the leaves off the top rather than getting down to the root of the troubles. We begin to outgrow our fear. Just a little example. Do you remember when you were at kindergarten or primary school, in the springtime, your teacher probably would have taught you how to plant little watercress seeds in a tiny little pot, and you would have watered it and you would have seen the green shoots, right? And then there was so much watercress in the little pot, the teacher would then take you and teach you how to put it into a bigger pot. And then there would be more watercress, and then they teach you to put it into a bigger pot. Well, that's how our fear, that's the same demonstration of how we outgrow our fear. Okay. We may well still have the fear, but we begin to outgrow it, right? It becomes less of a problem in our life. There's less self-reliance and more God-reliance. I can deal with more of those circumstances. So back to the black cat, right? I used to scream and run to the other side of the road. But as I went through this inventory and understood why isn't there a better way, trusting and relying upon God, it got to the point one day where I was here in this kitchen and there was a black cat outside and I thought, oh God, that's interesting. I didn't scream. I just looked at it and thought, oh, that's interesting. The next time I'd started to outgrow my fear, the next time I went out into the yard to put some rubbish into the bin and there was the black cat. Oh, that's interesting. I'd begun to outgrow my fear. Next thing, out in the yard, in comes the black cat. I decide to feed the black cat. I'd begun to outgrow my fear. Now I am the cat lady. Cats everywhere. It's a really simple example, but it can be applied to the other principles in our life. And if you don't think it can, and you need to talk to me about one of these massive fears that you think you have and how you're going to overcome them, because Mike's that silly example of the black cat. No, it's not a silly example. It's a representation of how one can outgrow their fear no matter what it is, because the solution is always the same. Fear is the opposite of love. Love is God. God is God-reliance. Fear is self-reliance. We have a power running in and through us that provides us with courage. And all I have to do is to have faith in this process, show up, do the inventory, take the instructions from my sponsor, and all starts to shift and alter and transform without me even realizing it. That's the beauty of the gift that we have in this program. Fear is the future. All we need to be is now. Resentment is the past. All we need to be is now. These inventories are life-changing, transformational freedom from the bondage of ourself. It's powerful, powerful stuff. That's why I am such a huge advocate for step 4, especially for the newcomer. We cannot put the fear of God into the newcomer. We've got to ask and help them get to the point where they have this freedom with no fear that can impact them. We've got a set of tools that are laid at our feet that help us overcome it. So I'll leave it at that.